Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to this last video of this mini series called What is My Trauma Type, within the larger series called Wildly Loved, where we're kind of understanding or trying to understand how our adaptations of childhood, that trauma brain that we had to sort of create, or that was created really, how that can kind of get stuck in our adult lives, in relationships with ourselves and others, how our nervous systems sort of perceive and run the world and respond. And that is really the bottom line, that for people who are less impacted by trauma and childhood wounds, they hit all of these fight, flight, fawn, freeze, please and appease, also for fawn, collapse, submit, and attach, cry out for help. They hit all of those too, but they don't get stuck and more fixated on having these more rigid responses. And so we can have these go-to types. And so yesterday's video was about some combos of those: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, collapse, submit, and attach, cry for help. And today's video is wrapping up a little bit more of the last part of the hybrids or combos that really start with fawn. Pete Walker has really gone into the idea of fawn as another trauma type, because he really has recognized and talked about this survival technique of really having to focus on the other, to be what Dan Brown and David Elliott call, I think, an outside-in orientator. This is where a lot of the caretaking comes from. And as we're going to talk about, I really do believe that when we talk about narcissists, we have to back them up by, well, who do they choose, right? And who tends to stay with them and try to make it work with them? And then where did those people come from? It's this domino effect, I truly believe. And so that is why you often see narcissists with very strong, loving, caretaking, very competent, kind-hearted people who have already, I believe, before they even met the narcissist, had to use a lot of those adaptations to survive. And who's going to love that most? A narcissist, for example. So we're going to go into that. Really quickly, if you're new here, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell. And that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. And please check out my courses, I should say, on Thinkific. There are 3 courses there around remothering yourself, remothering your inner child, and also your inner parent, because the inner parent is who's talking to the inner child. And then a free course on identifying childhood wounds and emotional abuse and neglect. And lastly, my flagship course on what do you do if you were raised in an environment with highly controlling, critical, unpredictable types of parents that often fall into the category of narcissistic or borderline, or even also called sometimes immature. But when we really look at it, these are parents who have very strong traits at a minimum of these disorders. And so that's a pattern you experience again and again and again that shapes your life. Okay, let's get into it. So we were talking about a lot of the combos yesterday. Today, as I said, they're just fawn. So fawn is the first word of the fawn freeze combo, for example. So remember, the first word is really the stronger first go-to of your trauma types. And so check out these videos if you're like, I just got here, I'm not totally sure what you're talking about. That will help explain it. So the fawn freeze is often the scapegoat Pete Walker talks about. And he says that this is the most codependently entrenched type. And what does that mean? I don't like the word codependent, because I think outside of substance abuse, it pathologizes that we actually need people in attachment. And so, but what we're basically doing here, though, as a fawn type, is that the caretaking starts to kind of become enmeshed with the other person. And so he says these are the 2 most passive of the 4 F's, the fight, flight, fawn, and freeze, that fawn and freeze are the most passive, and that both have often suffered the most punishment and rejection for being themselves. He talks about in toddlerhood, that's the stage where you're supposed to begin to explore the environment and you start to develop your first sense of autonomy. And that when the fawn freeze is not able to escape the scapegoat role, the blamed child in childhood, they can be set up to be victimized in adulthood. And so they're used to being, it's your fault, you did it wrong, it all lands on you. And that becomes part of who they are, which then sets them up to repeat those roles in their adult relationships. And he says in the worst case, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, is that these fawn freeze types don't get I don't like to use the word healed, but if there's not some modification of these strategies, they start choosing narcissists inadvertently, and narcissists choose them because they don't recognize that they're used to being caretakers, they're used to blaming themselves, and that can keep them stuck once they realize, oh, this is not the best relationship, but yet this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to take it. I'm supposed to if I just work harder and love them more and give them what they need, it'll get better. The next one is the fawn flight. And he says this is often the busyaholic parent. This is the head of all of the committees and the going and the doing. And that they escape their pain of abandonment by seeing themselves as this perfect, selfless caregiver, right? They're doing everything for everyone else. And what they're doing, though, is that they're using these obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors to rush around from one caretaking, needy person to another. And so that can be really difficult for them because if you think about flight, we're really running from intimacy and vulnerability by doing. We're always thinking about doing. When we're not doing, we're thinking about it, like I'm saying. And that they can also, because they put that perfectionism and drivenness on themselves, that they can become really perfectionistic and put that on others too, like their kids, for example, right? It has to always be, you got an A-, where's the A, where's the A+? And so they can also, Pete says, be overburdening to others with their advice because they basically think that they've got it all figured out. But what they're really doing is neglecting what's happening inside for their real selves and trying to run from that pain inside. The last one is the fawn fight. And Pete calls it the smother mother. This is that approach that I just love you so much. I'm just going to take care of you so much. And that would be a super enmeshed dynamic. And that there's also that fight part, and so that's that pushback part. And he says that they can also be misdiagnosed borderline because they can be really intense during emotional flashbacks, during their triggers. And that when they are triggered into their abandonment fears and feelings, that they can feel desperate for love. And so they can really vacillate, really go back and forth between, he says, clawing for love, like that's the fight part, and groveling for love. That is often what's the word used to talk about caretaking. Because it's not just pure caretaking. It's a caretaking that is a one-way deal. It's a one-way mirror. It's not reciprocal. And remember, the caretaking is actually serving a purpose for us to help us avoid our own pain, like I said. And so then what's happening is that they're projecting all of that onto like a child, for example. And their intentions are to be a caretaker, but it's really got this desperation to, I need to be loved at all costs. And that the child is going to feel that. It's going to feel suffocating, to be honest. And the last part of this is that this type, the fawn fight, seeks real intimacy. They are the most relational hybrid, but also the most susceptible to love addiction. Remember, so we're all of us, all of these types, these trauma types, we're trying to deal with our needs to protect ourselves and also to deal with intimacy feelings and fears and our desires and to manage them in a way that feels manageable. Because in all of these situations, let's say if your childhood was dictated by parents who were either emotionally neglectful or emotionally abusive or never there or too intense, unpredictable, volatile, you had a need to connect inside, but maybe it wasn't safe to do so, or you were just left to your own devices. And so that feeling and that need and that drive still exists inside. And so we're using all of these F4F types to try to deal with our feelings around that stuff. And it can be really, really difficult. And so those are the trauma types, those are the combo types. I'm sure there are many more we could get into. But I think what helps is to get the flavor of you understanding, okay, so I kind of relate to, like, say, flight and fawn or flight and freeze or whatever's happening. And then to be aware of, like I said in this video yesterday, where are the positive qualities in that? What are the strengths in that? And what are the things that I really need to begin to work on letting go of because they're not serving me and myself and others in relationship? Remember that I said, though, all of these are adaptations and, we're not doing them. We can't just think our way out of them. We're not doing them on purpose. We've learned to operate this way, but as I said, our brain is kind of stuck in that trauma brain. And so you have to not only, I think, become aware of these patterns and work on them relationally and in yourself, but really understand that these 4F types and beyond, They live in our body and our nervous system. And so we have to work on, if we're collapsing, mobilizing some. If we are immobilized, like I'm saying, too much, that there's a price we pay for that. If we are mobilizing too much, like the flight all of the time, there's a price we pay for that. And so like all of us, I think the goal is we're trying to find some semblance of balance, knowing that it's going to get way out of whack. It's impossible to think you're going to do all this work and always stay in balance. You're not. It's also learning how to manage yourself when you're not in balance, but you're trying to get there, having tools. But understanding that these things do live in your nervous system. They are in your body from the time your little baby infant self as a mammal meets the caregiver and the attachment system and their nervous system. We're always interacting and shifting. And so we have to look at, like I'm saying, how all of that affects us. So doing things like, mindfulness, guided imagery, breathing exercises, yoga, anything that meditations, working on some of those polyvagal, vagal techniques that help us kind of, getting into, let's say, nature and in blue, green environments. There's a lot of things we can do. Art, journaling, therapy, there's a lot of stuff. And so we'll probably talk more about that in the rest of the series. But I hope you found this helpful, and I will see you on Monday. Have a beautiful weekend, and please take care. Bye, guys.